Today we have with us Vladislav Davidson, straight from Paris. Welcome to Warsaw.
It's great to be with you.
From what I understand, you've been always moving around. You were born in one place, raised in another. Now you've been living in Paris for many years. Also, you lived in Odessa. How did this happen? How did you become so global in your travel, so to say, or where you have been living?
I'd like to make a joke about Moses walking through the desert for 40 years and finding the only place in the Middle East without oil. So, I'm a very, very deeply post-Soviet person, and like imperial, in the sense that my great-grandparents were from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then they became Romanian citizens, and then they became Ukrainian citizens, and then they were evacuated to the USSR citizens from the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And they were evacuated, two of my Ukrainian-born Jewish grandparents, to Uzbekistan, to Central Asia, where my family lived for half a century before we moved to America, with a little layover in Moscow for about 2 years in 89 to 91. So I'm an American citizen and a European, but I'm a Ukrainian Jew and a Ukrainian patriot who happened to have come from a forcibly Russified family of Ukrainian Jews who returned to his Ukrainian roots when he met my Ukrainian wife as a student in Paris. I didn't plan it that way, but I met the woman who I made my life with as a student in Paris. She's from Odessa. I have some historical and family links to Odessa. And that's the way it happened. And
then you lived in Odessa for quite a few years as well. You returned there before the Maidan Revolution or after?
I was spending about 3-4 months a year in Odessa for 4 years before the Maidan. I started going there in the summer of 2010 and spending a part of my year there. The summer, the nicer parts, the summer parts. We were reporting and doing stuff from Odessa, and then we founded a literary magazine called the Odessa Review, which is actually on its way back soon. And I spend a lot of time reporting on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, based in Odessa. And it's a city that's very close to my heart, because actually I lived in Little Odessa in Brighton Beach as a kid in America. So it's this kind of counterintuitive thing. Peter Pomerantsev wrote the preface to my first book, and he wrote that there was a kind of insane and counterfactual genius to my having been, grown up in Little Odessa and then going back to Big Odessa to meet my wife. Usually people move from Odessa to Brooklyn, not the other way around. It's kind of weird,
Yeah. Speaking about Little Odessa and Brighton and Coney Island,
sure.
This center of, I guess, Russian-speaking diaspora in the U.S.
Sure.
Have you heard anything? I don't know if you've been back since the war started.
Oh, all the time, yeah.
All the time,
All the time. I was just there a month ago.
How is the general atmosphere now between Ukrainians and Russians in Brighton Beach?
So when we speak of Brighton Beach, obviously it's a romantic place because it's next to the sea and under the train tracks, and people think of Arthur Miller and Joseph Heller and the Brighton Beach memoirs and all of this. So it's a romantic place. But when we say Brighton Beach, we really mean like half of South Brooklyn, like Sheepshead Bay, Bay Parkway, where there are a lot of Russian speakers from a former Soviet Union. We don't just mean Brighton Beach. We're talking about a lot of neighborhoods where there are maybe 500,000 post-Soviet Russian-speaking emigres. So, I go fairly often. Whenever I'm in New York, I pop in to see my mom, who still lives down there. And I was just there a month ago. There are Ukrainian flags all over the place. And my mom did tell me that there was a fist fight that the New York City Police Department did nothing to take apart, an altercation between Russian and Ukrainians. And I do believe that the Ukrainians won the fist fight, happily. There are Ukrainian flags everywhere. I'd say the community down there is like 70% pro-Ukrainian, and a lot of both the Russian-speaking Ukrainians and the Jewish origin Ukrainians are historically from Ukraine. So I would think a majority are on side with with Ukraine now, but there are all sorts of other people. I had a refugee staying with my mom, a woman from Dnipro, a nice Orthodox lady, and she went into a Ukrainian Orthodox church. She thought it was a Ukrainian Orthodox church in South Brooklyn, and the priest was blessing Putin, and she just stormed out.
Yeah.
So like, it's a really interesting world down there. You know, the demographics have changed a lot. It's become a lot more Central Asian than when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was more Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish. There's been a large Central Asian immigration to Brighton Beach, to the point where there are a lot of Uzbek restaurants and supermarkets. So it's really different from when I grew up there.
And if we then look at the big Odessa,
Yes.
the real Odessa.
Sure.
I saw a video a few days ago of a Ukrainian military helicopter flying along the coastline, and Odessa really does look like Miami on those pictures. You have these white high-rise buildings,
Sure.
you have the broad beaches,
Yeah.
you can even see some, I'm guessing, palm trees. It does look very exotic. It looks like Miami. How is the city? How would you describe the atmosphere? What is the ethos, the general feelings that are associated with Odessa?
Hedonism, pleasure, business, kind of liberal. It was always the most liberal place in the Russian Empire, by the way. It was outside of the Pale of Settlement, and there were never any slaves there. There was never, there were never any serfs there, and the Jews were allowed to live there, and the Germans were allowed to live there tax-free. So it was set up as a business-friendly, liberal, tax-free zone from the very beginning, right? That's its ethos. So it's deeply multicultural and cosmopolitan, which is amazing. It's great. It's a really lovely place.
Compare it a little bit with the Wild Wild West, that there were settlers coming in from various parts of the world,
Sure.
and it was at that point at least. It hadn't been a part of the Russian Empire for
A very long time.
For a long time, so it was a little bit of that settler mentality that was
Totally.
permeating.
Yeah. And so the original aristocracy and ruling class of Odessa was taken from like soldier of fortune types from France and Italy, Spain. Governor Deribas was of Spanish descent. I believe his mother was. I think he was born in France and of Spanish descent, and his mother was an Irish aristocrat. Jones, the American pirate captain of I Have Not Yet Begun to Fight fame, came there and served in the Tsar's navy there. The original ruling class was all Italians and French and Greeks, aristocrats or chancellors or soldiers of fortune who wanted to make a thing for themselves, and they went off and they built this city. So it was deeply European from the very beginning, deeply business friendly from the very beginning. It had no problems with ethnicity from the very beginning, and was deeply religiously plural from the very beginning. So Albanians were allowed to live there and practice their Muslim faith. A lot of Albanians there, I think, were Christian. Jews made up a very large percentage of a population from the very beginning. Ukrainians, Unionites, German settlers from Switzerland, from Germany came there, and they populated the towns also around Odessa proper. So just always a cosmopolitan place. It still is very much like that. And I always felt intrinsically at home there. It's a very nice place. It runs on its own rules. I just had a big piece on its identity in the war. It was published on August 24th in Tablet magazine, whose European culture correspondent I am. And I write about, it's a very long piece, about 4,500 words, about the future of Odessa as a country onto itself, because it's like Hong Kong, right? It's a free trade zone with its own ideas and its own spiritual identity, metaphysical identity, historical sense of itself. And it's changing very quickly. There's going to be a lot of cultural change, and it's going to have to find a new identity. It's not going to be able to continue operating based on 19th century Russian imperial nostalgia anymore, like a lot of people are into now. But it's just a really, really very much an interesting city, and I think everyone should visit.